Welcome to The Mystic Lens, a podcast by Current Collective Church where we explore the spiritual path through stories of transformation from real people in our community and explorations of Christian tradition through a mystic perspective. Our hope is that these conversations will help us feel even more connected to God, ourselves, and each other, inspiring us to live more expansively from the well of living water within. To learn more or connect with us further, visit thisiscurrent.org.
Jake, thank you for joining me on the Mystic Lens podcast today, my friend.
My deep, deep pleasure. As we've said in the past, every time we chat, it feels like it could have been a podcast, but we did it offline. So I'm super honored to just have another awesome conversation with you, but to be able to share it with others. So
yeah, dude, I agree. It's like every time we chat, and even just beforehand, it's just like I should have just clicked record from the freaking start. You know what I mean? There's just like a natural flow. I don't know. I'm like,
yeah.
You were even saying some things. I'm like, damn, I should have captured that. But
we'll find it. We'll get back into it. Don't worry.
We're in it, man. We're in it.
Go. Yeah.
So this, as I was sharing with you a little bit, kind of the intention behind this is to capture just real life stories and experiences and people's perspectives about the spiritual life, and as they are shifting and evolving in their own ways and worldviews. And so I just wanted to capture that for people so that when people are connected to the current collective community, they know a little bit of background, people's stories. But in addition to just having people in the community jump on, like there's a lot of people like yourself that are like deeply a part of Current, but from afar, and that are doing things similar to Current, that I feel like your voices are important for people in our space to hear from, to listen from, to be encouraged by. And so, you're definitely one of those people on my list that I'm like, we've been friends and just admire this work that you've devoted yourself to with Aldea. And so what I'd like to start to do is just kind of get into some of your background and story about how, a lot of stuff, as I said, I kind of might already know about, but our listeners don't know you yet. And so just to kind of bring them up to speed about the story that is Jake, and, bring people into that, because and this will make more sense for the listeners as we go along, but it's just, to me, just such an encouragement of like, you represent somebody who feels a tug and a nudge in your heart, and you just like won't bury the thing. Or if you do, it just keeps coming and tugging and knocking at the door of the heart. And there's just that surrender of just trusting that tug to do what God has put on your heart to do. And I just respect that and honor that. And so I hope people are able to just sort of glean from your story as just a way of just like, just keep following even whenever you're not quite sure where it's leading. Wow. And so he says, wow.
No, because I say wow because sometimes you look at your own story and you're thinking about how to sum it up and what are the bigger themes, and it changes, right? And you roll it over in your head. And honestly, thank you for that, because what you just said, I appreciate it. I'm honored, but also I feel like that feels accurate, and that feels like a way for me to even think about it. So so wow is like, yeah, cool. I love that. And just thank you for that. And thank you for inviting me into this space, because this is your community, and there's a really just obviously a sacred thing happening with what you're doing, and I'm honored to just have this space with your listeners. And as they'll see, like what we're doing at Aldea is very much a deep kinship with what you're doing at Current, and I feel like there's this deep connection, and so getting to know you has been a part of that. So anyway, enough of, there'll be plenty of time for, me just, oh, and the other thing I wanted to say that I've been, and I've told you this before, I've been a fan of yours before we even knew each other. So I'll just keep going with the flattery, because the work that you've been doing for many, many years has inspired people like me to keep going and to follow that thread. So we'll get into that. So I'll start at the beginning. Like perhaps some of, if not many of your listeners, I grew up in an evangelical Christian context. Specifically, I grew up in a mega church, a church that even, since then has continued to grow and grow. So it's like a mega church. Growing up in that,
where is this at?
This is Southern California. Kind of the suburbs of Southern California. Not exactly the beach like you get to experience every day, but close enough. And grew up in that community. I didn't know that there were all these different expressions of church. I just understood contemporary mega church culture. That was what church was. So I didn't think anything of it being like a particular way of doing things. This was just what it was to go to church and be a Christian. I will say that, it was such a big part of my life. It really was my social community. Once I started to get more involved and play music, it became my, artistic outlet. And then eventually I, in my late teens, early 20s, started to work at this church as a musician, worship leader. And so it was such a big part of my life and my identity, my friendships and my understanding of myself and my spiritual journey. So much was wrapped up in the community that I grew up in. So in my, I would say like early 20s, I was handed a book called Love Wins by Rob Bell. I'm sure some of your listeners have heard of it. If they haven't, I'll just give a little bit of a backstory on this book. Rob Bell was a really popular author and megachurch pastor in the, early mid 2000s. Huge deal. His books were massive. And then he came out with this book where he basically just questions the idea of hell and does so with a lot of like scholarship. He's really being thoughtful about how he does it. And he just kind of even philosophically questions, like, does this line up with how we're understanding God? Like, we have this, understanding of this God that is so loving. I mean, the book is called Love Wins. So it's ultimately like oriented towards love. And you have this picture of a God that is so full of love and grace and compassion. Does it even line up with the idea of hell that we have? And then, do we have some historical basis to even challenge our current understanding of hell? And it was really helpful for me in unlearning that particular concept, which had been really, really harmful to me. I didn't know it at the time, but a doctrine of hell can really do a lot to you psychologically. And we can get more into that later, sure. But reading that book also it was the first time that I saw someone publicly questioning something that was previously unquestionable. And then I came to find out that he had been totally ostracized and essentially excommunicated from the church because of it. And he was labeled a heretic, which kind of made him more badass. So I started to follow his work, and I also started to just open up within myself to the idea that, it's possible to question some of the unquestionables. And maybe as you do, you're led to a deeper sense of truth and a deeper sense of, just being honest with yourself. Like, I recognized in reading that book, I recognized, I always had an issue with hell, but this book gave language to some things that I was struggling with. And that just continued to happen. As, more and more like doctrines got knocked down, I realized within myself, I always had a problem with this, but now I finally feel the freedom and I have some language and tools to talk about it. So begin doing that systematically with different things. But at this time, early 20s, I moved to Seattle. I wasn't out of the evangelical world yet because I was still kind of early in that process of what we, called deconstruction. Mm-hmm. And so I continued to kind of rise the ranks in contemporary megachurch world. And at this time, I really felt like I split in two. There was a part of me that was really excited about having more opportunity and like developing my career and essentially, as a in the like ministry world and doing music, you essentially get to be a professional musician, but you don't have to be as good as like, real professional musicians. So it's a sweet gig. Well. Yeah, you get paid pretty good sometimes, not all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Depending on the situation.
That's true.
But you get to like live the rock star life. Let's be real. And also you get to like be with people and be in community. And so a lot of it is working with people. And so there's so many like really awesome things that like I loved, like being a part of a team. There was like, it was really cool.
And just like the community and the like the tightness that comes from that and the,
for sure.
Yeah.
And there's creativity, and there's like some artistry involved. So there was a lot of really beautiful things that were happening at this time. And I feel like I'm going in a particular direction. So things seem like they're lining up. However, at the same time, the thing that I'm propping up through the music and the ministry, like this version of Christianity that I was propping up, I was internally totally like it was falling apart and dissolving and crumbling inside of me. So there was like my authentic belief structure, and then there was what my life was like producing, and they felt totally at odds. And like you spoke earlier about this idea of like following the thing that's calling you from within, and during that period of my life, it was like 2, 3, 4 years where it was really challenging because I wanted so deeply to follow that thing from within, but I didn't know how. I didn't think that if I left the evangelical Christian world, that I would even ever have a job again. So I'm thinking, okay, if I honor this thing within myself, I'm throwing away all of this stuff I've worked towards. Around this time, I came across your stuff on social media, and it was just an example of someone was out there doing it. Like you were talking about it, you were being honest, you were sharing what you had gone through, and you were talking about different authors and different things. And so it was really encouraging just to know that other people were out there doing the work. And I followed you, and I was like, I'm just going to pay attention to what he's doing, and that's hopefully that'll like help me figure some stuff out when I'm ready. So yeah, kept reading, kept, doing that internal work, kept exploring, but so much in secret because I had this job and all that. So anyway, I'll just kind of like cut to the, get a little bit closer to where we are now. Basically, around the pandemic, which I think for so many people, the pandemic was like this big opening moment, a portal, something that was so difficult and we would have never have asked for, and yet invited change and disruption for a lot of us that maybe has allowed for a lot of fruit and a lot of new things to bloom. And so for me, like things like during that time, the community that I was at, things really just started to feel like so politically charged, and it had really, like, the pandemic had really become this deeply political issue, and it just didn't feel like it resonated with me, the stances that were being taken at this community. And so I just felt like I felt like, okay, Jake, you've already been like having this internal struggle for 3-4 years. How long are you going to take this? And what are you willing to like essentially put up with and ignore in order to keep this sense of security? And so I reached this moment where I realized, okay, at a certain point, I'm not going to be able to grow internally if my external circumstances aren't supporting this. Like, I'm not going to be able to continue to have this spiritual journey inside that I keep secret if I'm continuing to work in an environment where I don't feel like I'm able to be my authentic self. And so I basically at that moment decided, all right, I'm going to like follow the internal journey, even if I have no sense of what, my financial career journey is going to look like. So left that church, got involved with a progressive Christian community in I might have mentioned this was in Seattle, I think. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm all over the place. So in Seattle,
No, you're
again,
good.
got involved with a progressive Christian community, experienced a lot of healing just getting out of evangelicalism. And, the pastor of this community that I ended up transitioning to is just a dear friend of mine to this day, and just really just such a tender heart, and was able to help me create a space for me to like heal from just some of that inauthenticity that I had really caused for myself. So I was able to like be more myself, be in relationship, in ministry where I felt like I could be authentic, and it healed a ton for me. And then I got to a point where I felt like, I was just being called forward in my own journey into more of a specific direction of authenticity for me, which specifically would be a community where there is no specific affiliation with any one particular religion, but a space and a community where people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, all kind of faith journeys can come together and unite over values rather than specific beliefs. And so I began a search for that type of community. And as I've come to understand, it's a very rare, specific, and niche type of thing. But somehow, some way, when I was searching, Aldea Spiritual Community in Tucson, Arizona was also searching for a lead pastor. And so the timing was just perfect. And I applied, and it all worked out. And so I moved from the green and cloudy and rainy, wet Pacific Northwest to the extremely dry and sunny and hot Sonoran Desert. And 2.5 years later, I'm deep in this community. We're building something really cool. And I'm also feeling like the more authentic, or the most authentic version of myself that I've ever been in a public way. So, so being able to do this with you and talk about it publicly, huge honor. And thanks for asking.
Yeah, man. And thanks for bringing a lot of folks like up to speed with your story. And there was even stuff in that I was like, felt like I was just hearing for the first time. I'm like, and it's really fascinating to me in your story how it seems like the inner journey's always been mirrored in a external communal place. Like you were at the mega church, in Southern California, and then you would find these other spaces that would, enable you to step into more expansive places. And sometimes that external place would begin to maybe, energetically force you out of it, or you would begin to outgrow it. Sometimes each one would either take the lead, but where you're at now, it's interesting. It's like you've always been connected to some community through your journey. Because in my experience, and how you initially connected with me through the project Spiritual Nomad is, for many years I was absolutely alone by myself with no community, with no one to bounce anything off of, with really feeling like, a nomadic sort of person, just kind of wandering around and stumbling across different things. And I'm sure there's an element to that for you too, but it's awesome that you seem to have always had some people around you in some way. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, and I think obviously we know the importance of community and the importance of relationship, and the fact that even if you don't go to church, we all have some form of community, whether it's like your, trivia team. I've always done it as church. So if I'm trying to pull random examples, they're going to sound weird, but because it's, for me, I was like a church person. But people do, whether it's like sports or gaming, like people have community, people find community. Nowadays, people are finding it more, on the internet, and, there are good questions being asked of like what kinds of community we actually need and benefit from as human beings. But I think in general, like we know we're a communal species. We're a social animal, as it's been said. But I think for me specifically, when I first started going to church, it actually had come out of a really like rough time in my life where, I really got involved in church. I had been going, but I really got involved in like right after junior high, and junior high for me was terrible. I don't know if eighth grade is good for anybody. If there's anyone listening out there where eighth grade was good for you, like you are very blessed, because eighth grade sucks. And really rough year. And I really got super involved in church after that, and also started playing music pretty quickly after that. And it was like everything that I had missed in terms of not being socially accepted, not feeling like I had a community, not feeling like I had a sense of belonging. I think up until that point, I had never really known what belonging felt like. And then in just youth group and being young, going to church, I felt this sense of deep belonging. So that was something where like it just felt really amazing to feel like I was part of something, and I had value, and I just felt like I was on a team, so to speak. And so, as my life changed and evolved and my beliefs changed, I did start to question, like, all right, I have belonging, but do people who believe differently have belonging, or do people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, do they have the same belonging that I have? So those questions, like you said, energetically forced me into different spaces, and I'm thankful for that. But what's interesting about community always being a part of it for me is, I think growing up so young in a church context or a faith community context, I started to my brain started to become wired for thinking about things in terms of community. So I almost couldn't picture being on a spiritual journey, even if it was way outside of the confines of the type of faith that I grew up in. I couldn't picture it without there still being some kind of community. And if I'm being honest, I always pictured there even being like a service, which is so funny. Like, I'm always still like, well, yeah, there's going to be like a little bit of music, and there's going to be like a talk and stuff. Because that was just like, I've been going to things like that weekly for, decades. so I think in terms of church, I'm sorry, And so
I get it.
Yeah. So I think for me, like, the honest truth is that even when I was, radically expanding my understanding of faith, I really thought about it in those very specific terms. And I respect that there are people who they need other things. Like, not everyone needs the same thing I need. So there are going to be people out there that are never going to resonate with going to like a weekly gathering as their community. I was talking to someone about what I do, and I kind of heard them say something like, like, it's just faith and spirituality is just too personal for me, that it's never going to be something that's communal. And I respect that. Like, everyone's different, but there are people I think like you, like myself, who do like think in those terms, and we want something more physical and a specific space at a specific time, and we're together and we're doing something, and there's a container. And so I've always thought in those terms. And so for me, even as things changed, I have thought about how to, keep some of that structure there, because I've realized, I structure's good with me. I like a certain level of structure, because as much as we, want to think of ourselves as free spirits and going with the flow, like, there's still some level of a container and a context that things happen in. The river still has some sort of guidance and channel, where even when it's flowing freely. So that's my take on why I've held on to community.
Yeah, dude, that's really good. I feel the prompting to talk to you just a little bit about that time where things were shifting for you, because at current, there tends to be a lot of folks there's a lot of different expressions. You could argue that everybody's individual experience is its own unique affiliation in some way or another, but there tends to be people who are, I call them more open-minded traditionalists, people who they really resonate with the story, the narrative of Christ, and really look to Jesus to be, their rabbi, their person, their really their only framework of spirituality, but they're open-minded to the fact that we do sound healing, and I reference the Buddha and other things as well. So they're open-minded enough to have that. And then we have this other sort of contingency of people, if you will, that tend to be more from like the spiritual circle spaces. And they have some interest and some, I call it like an affinity for the wisdom of Christ. They're interested in it, and they start coming to the space because maybe they've been to another church and it's like chewed them up and spit them out sometimes quicker than others, you know? Yeah. And it's like, oh, here's like a place that's like not dogmatic and super open and pretty woo-woo for churches, and talking about a lot of different things, and they feel safe there. And so like you're saying, I feel like I like to think a space like ours is pretty unique in the way that it's coming into shape. And for you, like speaking to some of these different groups, if you will, maybe we can start with that first sort of group, and then we'll get to the second one, because I think the second one better dovetails with what Aldea is. But to go to that first group of a sort of open-minded traditionalist, if you will, like when you were starting to crack open a little bit the door to a new room, if you will, and the light that was peeking through was Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, which huge shout out to Rob Bell. This is going to come out after Easter, so it'll be in retrospect now. But as we look going up to Easter, I'm actually totally ripping off one of his talks that he did right after he left Mars Hill. Cool. It's called "She Thought He Was the Gardener." That's the name of my talk for Easter. Right.
I like it.
But I'm still like, I love Rob. Like, he's great all these years later, and it's awesome. But Rob was kind of, I'd say, both of our kind of gateway drugs, if you will. And that's probably not a good way to say it, but nonetheless,
that's how I'd say it for sure. Okay. Oh yeah.
Well, I'm like, yeah. So I'd reference it like that too, and I know you do too, and I know we've talked about other things too, and I'm not scared to talk about psychedelics or any of the other modalities as well. So I guess, Rob in that context would be the opening to a whole new trip for sure. And so, I would love for you to just kind of speak to that time in your life, what was coming up, and what were some of the things that you were, that split that was starting to happen inside of you, and some of the identity that was coming into question around who I am in the community, and then who I am with this like door that's opening to a new room again. Like what does that tension feel like? And if people even listening to this in the space, they're dipping their toe into some new waters, like what was that experience like for you? Yeah.
Probably my favorite thing to talk about. So it's easy. It's a joy. And I just to give your listeners a spoiler alert, like it's never done. It's a journey that's going on. It's going on. It'll continue for the rest of your life, maybe after. And basically it's one of those things where, we just have to embrace the fact that we're always changing. We're always in flow, and we're always in flux. We're not, like, even if we want to be, we're not static human beings. So when I first begin to, question and I think the thing that really arose, and I'm even looking back going, I don't know how this showed up for me, but I'm so glad it did, was radical permission to question, like for people who grew up in really rigid, conservative, evangelical environments, questioning is not allowed. It's not safe. And maybe you might find some people that you can question with, but eventually you're going to get redirected. You're going to be like, well, your questions are okay, but ultimately we need to end up here. And so for me, that, like I was thinking about talking to you, and I had a memory pop back into my mind where I remember, like, within the year of reading Love Wins and starting to question some of this stuff, I found this gorgeous Hindu temple, like, I don't know, 30 minutes from my house, and started going like here and there, and it was the most beautiful, like hand carved, like just floor to ceiling, just these different statues and depicting kind of the Hindu pantheon. And just, it was like so different. It was something I just, at that time, I had never experienced, like the Hindu cosmology in a real like visceral way. And so, and at that time, I think probably around the same time I was maybe reading like the Bhagavad Gita and things. And so I remember experiencing Hinduism and going, oh, like, it's really easy for me to just look at this and go, oh my gosh, like it's all this beautiful language and metaphor and visualization of deeper truths. Like I had no problem going, yeah, they're speaking to something deeper here using all this amazing, beautiful, colorful imagery. But yet when it came to my own tradition, there was so much conflict over like what's true and what's like what actually happened and the dogma of it. So I guess like I wasn't caught up in the dogma when I could approach a completely different faith tradition. And so it kind of showed me that like, okay, I've been way overemphasizing the dogma in my own, but it was also part of that permission of, hey, like you can check out other authors and other religions and other practices and like it's safe. I've been told for so many years, like it's not safe over there. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's really not safe is because you can't trust yourself over, if you were to go explore other things, right? Like you can't trust yourself. Like ultimately your own guidance system is off and it's wrong. And so if you go to explore a different tradition, you're going to end up being drawn in by something that's not good for you. And that was the narrative that I've been told, for so much of my life. But I really came back to, actually Jesus saying like, you will know something by its fruit, right? Or you will know like the goodness of a thing by what it produces. And I started to realize, oh man, there's all this beauty in these other cultures, other practices, other traditions, things that were always off limits or to be avoided or just not appreciated by the faith that I came up in. And I realized, oh, there's fruit in all of this stuff. You're telling me like, all the Buddhists and all the Hindus who live like aren't experiencing a deep spiritual connection and a deep life of value. So I just started to realize kind of the ridiculous notion that my tradition has all the answers and that every other tradition doesn't. And when you do that, you start to decenter it a little bit where you go, oh, like, you talk about the people who are the traditionalists who are open-minded. Like, you kind of get to this point where you can go, yeah, I can, you might be someone who says like, yeah, I'm really deeply still connected to Jesus and the Christian tradition, but starting to open their mind to, but that doesn't mean that I have the exclusivity on the only way to a full deep spiritual life, and I'm sure that's what your open-minded traditionalists are experiencing. When you describe those categories, I have the exact same demographic of people in my community. So that's what I experience with them. And so there's that beginning of that feeling of like, yeah, like I'm still connected to this deeply. I still draw from this well, but I'm not discounting the fact that there are other wells. So that was the initial crack for me. And then I think eventually for me, I ended up giving myself permission to more deeply dive into other wells. And at a certain point, I think you just get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm a connoisseur of the water. Like, I don't care. I don't, if it's water, if it's pure water, I don't care where it comes from. Like I can come back to the Jesus well, or I can go over to that well or that well, because you can trust your internal guidance system to know what is going to be water that you should drink and water that you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. With that process, I feel like in maybe this is just for me, but it sounds like a lot of people are in this space too, is that they have this like faithful soldier within them that seeks up to defend that conditioning. Because you're talking about, for so long, this is the way that I, was told. And that becomes a part of your operating system. And so a lot of times when people begin to dip their toes into other waters, it's like that very much protective, faithful soldier comes up to try to protect you from potential harm. Like there's something that can potentially be good there, but like, what was that tension like for you? Did you feel like you had a lot of inner struggle when you were feeling open to more of a wider lens, if you will?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the faithful soldier, because I do think just something interesting about that is I think the faithful soldier maybe even goes past religious belonging and is so deep. It's like deep psychological childhood stuff. So I mean, we have a loyal soldier that goes back to like, I want to be a good boy, you know what I mean? I want to be a good child, right? I want to feel safe, you know, like we have these really deep innate survival things. And then it gets attached to, well, if I'm like participating in this religion in this particular way, I'm being a good child or a good person, you know. And so I just think
acceptance.
It's that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Belonging. And that's even goes into like our deep survival needs of needing to be a part of a tribe so that we're safe, so that, you know, we're protected when danger comes. So all that to say is that I think that faithful soldier thing is like really, really deep in our psyche as human beings. For me, you know, you talk about tension. I would describe it as a push and a pull, because there would be these moments where I would like really like kind of go into these like new insights or new experiences spiritually and be like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. This is so amazing. And then I would, oh, whoa, that's cool. Fireworks, hooray. I don't know how I used my hands to create a firework display. That's incredible.
Dude,
yeah,
that's
what
awesome.
it felt like, though. That is what it felt like. It was, you know, like vibrant. You know, I mean, I would have these experiences and these insights and read new things and listen to new things and feel like, whoa, like I am opening up and this is so amazing. So that felt really good. And then I would be met with the reality that the spaces that I was a part of or the structure of my life wasn't fully there to meet and support everything, you know? So it'd almost be like, I'm like speeding forward going like, this is so exciting. And then I kind of like hit these brick walls. And that was the tension. And especially for me, it's like I had staked so much of my life and my career. And there were many times where I questioned, like, am I going to ever be able to like get to a place where I'll be able to fully be myself in a public way? Like there were times where I wondered if I would live my entire life kind of having this like deep spiritual whatever awakening on the down low and not actually being able to share it. But as I've come to learn, like sharing it is in my DNA. So that would have killed me. I realized that. And that's why I just couldn't do it, because I didn't want to like kill my soul that way. So that the years of, you know, I'm 31, so like I have, you know, God willing, much life to live. But the years of that tension were some of the hardest years of my life for sure, because I felt like I'm a fraud, both like I'm a fraud pretending to be, you know, this particular kind of Christian, or I'm a fraud pretending to be thinking I'm super spiritual or whatever, but in fact, like you're not living in authenticity, you know? So it's like on both ends, I felt like a fraud. I felt like, I was, you know, continually felt like I'm choosing security and safety and comfort over authenticity. And also like to everyone out there who is stuck in real situations where like you're facing those tensions, like there is no right. I mean, there isn't always like this perfect, clean, right answer. So like, hey, good for you for like being in the tension. And it's hard. It's hard. I'm not here to be like, oh, like, you know, if you're not being authentic, then you suck. You know what I mean? It's not like that. Like, it's a hard thing to do. And I know that there are many pastors and many people in ministry who wish they could speak more openly like you and I are speaking now. And they just cannot, because there's a paycheck involved and there's financial security involved and there's family. And I respect that. I want to like demean that in any way, but I just recognize for myself, it was going to ultimately like just tank me when it comes to my soul. And so that was why, like, yeah, I mean, the tension was so real for sure. And so I don't want to like skip past that.
Yeah. When did you have the courage to begin to act on some of these things? Like, because you spent years in a space with this inner tension. And then, you know, it sounds like whenever you were in the progressive church community, that gave a little bit of breathing room for you, you know, and maybe we will or won't, I don't know, but the tension between the conservative and progressive Christianity and all that, and I know offline talked about it before. For me, I just felt like I saw the fundamentalism of both sides, and I needed to kind of go my own path and carve a new way. But when you were healing in that space, when did you feel that courage to branch out and to begin to live that? Was it in that space, or do you feel like it was after you left that space that you really felt like you got to be yourself?
Yeah, I think that the amount that I was able to start being able to be myself in that space was so big compared to what I had experienced before. That was why it was so healing, is because the people in that church, the leadership, it was like a serious invitation to be myself. So dramatically different from what I had experienced in the past that, like, just right off the bat, I began to heal, and just began to, like, be honest with myself. And, you know, that community in particular has a really deep commitment to social justice and specifically advocacy for the LGBTQIA plus community. And it was so beautiful to be a part of, because I think for so long I had felt like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually in a system that is causing harm to these beloved, you know, brothers and sisters and others. And so just being able to, like, be on the other side of that was like deeply healing. I think then once you get to the point where you feel like safe enough to be yourself, then it just starts moving really quickly. So basically, totally. I spent, you know, 11 years or 12 years, like, deep in the evangelical church, very slowly building the momentum to get out, right? And then I was in this progressive Christian community for a year and a half, and in that year and a half, I had like 12 years worth of just continuing to learn who I am more and being more honest with myself and being safe to do so. And I think it was through that I realized, like, yeah, I love the Jesus path. And I think there's so much, you know, power in the message and the teachings of Jesus, and or a more cosmic Christ understanding, as Richard Rohr talks about. And so I'm all for, like, still using Jesus language, but I don't necessarily think that I myself am really concerned anymore with how I identify, of saying, like, I am a Christian or I'm not. It's like, to me, like, personally, I just don't need categories. And so when I kind of got to that place within the progressive Christian community, I realized, oh, maybe there's a structure of community for people who feel like that. And it doesn't mean you have to be that way, but maybe, you know, and maybe that's where I'm called, you know, like, hey, people who are really called. And I think the pastors who are doing progressive Christianity, like a lot of them, I think, are just, like, deeply called to that, because they are deeply wired for a particular way of presenting the Jesus story and spirituality. And I'm like, go do that. And I just felt like, even being there, I felt like, oh, I'm wired a little differently, and I feel totally safe to express that. So the conversation of leaving that church was so much easier than any conversation I've had before. And I've remained friends with that pastor to this day, because he's an awesome dude. And he was like, go do it and, like, be you, you know? And so that was the level of healing that I experienced there. You get enough momentum, and then things just, you know, and you free yourself of the roadblocks, and then things just start to kind of happen. Yeah.
And where you're at now, it feels like there just has been that permission again, and it's like you've lived that out in a very like compelling way, I guess, like for others to be able to follow that too, like, because where you're at now with Aldea, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that, because we're kind of to that point where you're at, and including the Jesus story, but yet not being limited to it, because that's where I feel like a lot of people start to get a little confused, at least in my experience. They start to be like, okay, well, where are you? Where can I place you in the matrix of my mind? Where's the box I can put you in? And even my language of using like mystic Christian or anything like that, I hold it very loosely. I hold it very openly because, I come back to a more non-dual understanding of like, I mean, what are labels and words and terms and things like and Words Create Worlds resource I just came out with. It's like they are not truth. It's what points to that. And like you mentioned earlier, I often reference that Jesus himself says you'll know a tree by its fruit, or you search the scriptures for you think in them you find life, and our obsession with needing this sort of external validation and affiliation in order to be okay or on the right path or, truly spiritual or whatever it might be. And, I'm sure you've ran across this as well when people are navigating that sort of like, spinning apple wheel of death or whatever in their head. That's just kind of like, where do I, like, are you okay? Or like, should I affiliate with you? Not whatever. Like, there seems to be this like really hard friction, this really tense friction that comes up whenever people are trying to understand, like, you're appreciative of the Jesus, wisdom, but yet not confined to it in some way. And people tend to have a difficult time understanding that. With people in your own community, like how do you feel like you articulate where you're at spiritually? How do you sort of frame the spirituality of Aldea, your spirituality, what people consider maybe like safe or unsafe for those that are still kind of working through what that means. I know there's a lot there, but punch at what you will from all of that. But how do you reconcile some of that tension and friction in yourself and in the community for where you're at now?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is just to give a little context. This is a community that has been around a very long time, like in some form or another, over 20 years. And the Aldea became Aldea and essentially transitioned from being a more conservative megachurch into a open-minded, inclusive, spiritual community where the uniting factor would be love rather than dogma. So there's this motto that has been with Aldea for like over a decade: love, period. And that's it. It's like everything ultimately comes back to love. That's our guiding, central value above and beyond any kind of dogma, right? So I say that to say is that Aldea had been on this journey for a long time before me getting there. And when I came into it, I was embraced with the people who had already done so much work in just being able to find their own authenticity and it's always a journey. There's always an arc to these things, whether it's with an individual or a community. So I'm very fortunate that I came in at a time where there was a lot of history and a lot of authenticity that already developed. So when I came in, I felt safe to just be myself, right? And just kind of share spirituality as I was experiencing it. Of course, like, you start a new job, like everyone who's ever started a new job knows, like, you're going to kind of like take it a little easy in the beginning and just kind of feel things out and get a vibe for like what, where am I? Like I moved, like a significant amount, like I moved from Washington to Arizona, like, and I want to just be like thoughtful coming in and respect and try to learn where people are at. Right. So I learned very quickly that basically what you described, which is that there are some, Jesus loving traditionalists who are very open-minded. And then there are also a lot of spiritual, not religious people who are open-minded to Jesus. And more or less that was like the bulk of, and it is still the bulk of the people that are in the community. And I started to realize, if I just really at the end of the day, like given the journey that I had described to you of all this like drive towards authenticity and then finally being in this place, I kind of like still adopted this like let's just go all in and see what happens, like let's just do this all the way. When I first got to the community, like, there was even some questions of its own sustainability, like how long are we going to be able to do this? COVID had really been very challenging for the community, and a lot of the leadership transition had taken place during the pandemic, so it was just a very like difficult time. So when I came in, it was like let's like reboot, and then let's like give it all we have. And that was the mentality even before I came in. So then I came in and I met that with, and like if that's what you're giving me, I'm going to give you my full honest self, because I think like the best version of this community is going to come through when on all levels we're all just being as authentic as we can be. So really, like, I would say that like from the stage in the beginning, I was, using a lot of Jesus language, but, just also bringing in stuff from all over the place, right? Hinduism, Buddhism, the Tao. I'm very, it's like you'll rarely hear a message where either Ram Dass nor Alan Watts is quoted. Like it's going to be one, they're going to show up all the time. So kind of providing this broad perspective and saying like, hey, when we're talking about these universal truths, and look how Jesus reflects this too, right? Like, isn't Jesus kind of in line with what's going on in this passage from the Tao, right? And I started to realize that I was sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I was doing that to legitimize it. Meaning I would bring Jesus in almost in a token way to be like, here's this thing I want to talk about. And hey, look, Jesus kind of like talked about that, or like Jesus reflected that with his life too. So it's okay. And then I kind of realized like, I don't really even need to do that. Like if I want to bring Jesus in because there's like some things that I want to speak to that Jesus, I think, really speaks to, which still happens all the time, then let's do that. And it'll be really impactful because I certainly haven't like thrown out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to the Jesus story and so much Christian imagery. But for me, it's like, I realized like I was doing a lot of it to legitimize it, but I realized no one needed me to do that. Over time, I realized, people are fine if Jesus shows up when it's appropriate. And, I mean, these days there are like weeks, months, sometimes entire series where I barely mention Jesus. Now, again, like mentioning Jesus by name is almost like, to me, it's irrelevant because I'm like, Jesus was about a particular way of being in the world. I don't think Jesus himself was all that concerned with how you get there. He was concerned about the way, the fruit, right? Yeah. And so for me, I'm like, call it whatever you want. Call it the Christ, like this energy and this love that is guiding us toward deeper wholeness and authenticity and like truth. Like, that shows up in everything. That shows up if I'm talking about this may be weird for some people, but for me, like if I'm talking about evolution, how beautiful and how this amazing process of evolution has created this incredible, beautiful world, and there's this like this life bursting forth through creation and this complexity that keeps coming forth. For me personally, like I can go, oh, that's like another word for the Christ in all, is like, so I can go real scientific and it doesn't, for me, it doesn't need to leave the realm of like, I can still think of it as the Christ as well, and so I think that's something that maybe people are still getting comfortable with, is because it's like, we've drawn these dividing lines where it's like, Jesus is over here. And then like a different cosmologies are over here, and for me, I'm like, why? Like we can have it all. So
I feel like what you're doing, and the way that I would say it is like, there are spaces that teach you about Jesus, and then there is a space that enables you to live the way that Jesus taught about himself. And it's the divide between the religion of Christianity and the way of Christ. And Christ does not have to pigeonhole itself into teaching very particular doctrines on Sunday morning. I often like to remind Christians that Jesus did not preach the Nicene Creed.
Yeah.
Like, that's, and to some listeners are like, what's the Nicene Creed? Don't worry about it. But really though, like what I see you embodying is the ability to be able to reference where you need to, but get down to something that is more true than the stories we tell ourselves about truth, quote unquote, and helping people drop into a deeper sense of their being. And I think to your point, like I have done the same thing. Like essentially what I'm doing is validating myself, and maybe even questioning my own self, my own motivations, my own, authority, even in some ways. Like I'm qualifying it because maybe Jesus taught about this or whatever. And that comes back to conditioning. And it sounds like, at least for me, it's like coming through to that true, authentic expression means, and if I'm really connected to what Jesus calls the Father, which is the source of all creation, like if that's really the goal, then it's not going to matter as much what I try to persuade or argue conceptually about, but rather how am I actually showing up as the embodiment of the Father in real time, in real space, for transformation and wholeness. And so I see you in your story, in your progression, like dropping into the true self, the authentic expression, has led you through this. And I love how you were even just mentioning about that, validating yourself by like token referencing Jesus. And it's like allowing that to even dissolve. And there's people even still in my life in the current community that might be uncomfortable with that. But there was some months back when we were meeting monthly, I'm like, I have not talked about Jesus in a couple months. And I remember talking to my wife about it and feeling uncomfortable about it. She's like, why do you feel uncomfortable about that? And it's like, oh, because I'm propping this up to be a fresh expression of, a fresh Christian expression. And I've not talked about Jesus at all. And she's like, well, Jesus himself, I don't think was interested in establishing, churches that just like were all about making sure people talked about him every week. Like, are we encouraging each other to live in this way? And that's what's more important than, again, regurgitating the doctrines that have come from the church fathers later, And so I think, like, for you, like, following that authentic expression has brought you to this place, and your okayness with not referencing that, I think, is just evidence that, like, there is a new territory and newness available, for what Aldea wants to carve a pathway to be. And so I guess as we kind of, as a little tangent, if I can speak, my goodness, tangent, for the love of God.
I like that rangent. It's like a tangent that has some charge to it, like it's it's like a passionate tangent, I went on a rangent.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
A rangent, a tangent, whatever. Yeah. But as we kind of come to the close of the episode, like, I just wanted to just see that, like, man, like, there's been a pattern and theme through this whole thing, and it has been you reconciling, like, that tug of divinity in you to the next chapter, to the next unfoldment, to the next season, as a refining process. And that's why I wanted to have you on, is because what I see in so many in our community is people that are just feeling their way through it the best they have of what feels the most capital T true to them, regardless of its whatever around them or their conditioning. And I like, you have been doing that. And I think it's an encouragement. I guess as we end, I'm curious, what is maybe one of the most surprising things for this season of life that you've been in and leading Aldea. What's been one of the most surprising, didn't see that one coming thing that's happened in this season?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely been a lot of season of surprise, and I think for me, like being able to just have this conversation with you, it's so fun, and just thank you again. You also just been so kind, and so like just know I'm honored to be doing this alongside of you. So everything you're saying about me, I feel the same way about you. So thank you for that. I mean, it's hard for me. Like, authenticity is the word that just comes up. It's been just like a big life theme for me. And I feel like I'm really in this, like, for me in my life right now, I'm in this moment where I feel like I was like very closed, like always a very outgoing person, but I've been very like, I just felt like there was so much hidden for so long. And I feel like being able to like open up like a flower blooming has just felt so great. And so I think, when I think about this season of life and Aldea, I think that the degree of authenticity has been surprising for me. Of like, I keep getting in conversations and surprise myself at like how free I feel, like how, coming from a world where if I wanted to talk about my spiritual journey, for a long time, it was like I had to find people that I knew were safe, that I knew wouldn't essentially rat me out, right? Now it's like, because I'm leading this community, like I don't like I am a huge part of getting to determine what that safety looks like. And so like I don't need to worry if if someone else is going to find out if I believe something. Like I'm just getting on stage talking about it, I also want to add, like, I'm part of what is working in this community is like I've tried to help. I didn't create this culture by any means, but I've tried to help further a culture as it already existed before I got there, in which a leader can actually be very authentic about not knowing and show up and be like, hey, I'm just working this shit out in real time with you all. I think that that's something that doesn't really exist in general contemporary church culture. I know that you are creating that type of authentic space in your community, and I think that that's what I'm trying to do as well, right? Is like, can we like be just like, I'm just a person on my own journey also. Like I don't have the answers. I'm not the, I don't have it all figured out. So that's also been like an opportunity to be super authentic, is because there was never a point where I was like, well, I need to like appear as though I have it all figured out. When I first got to Aldea, I was probably 20 to 30 years younger than most of the people in the congregation. And so it was like, it was just ridiculous to think that I would show up and pretend like I had some kind of wisdom that these people hadn't already lived through in their lives. So for me, I felt like the role is, hey, I'm going to just be honest about some things that I'm working through and like just share, hey, this is where I'm at in my journey in real time. And that's actually resonated with a ton of people, a lot more than I think if I were to be like, here's something that I figured out, and it just feels silly to say that. But so, I mean, I think that like the degree that when you create that structure where you're kind of like, yeah, like we're all just humans trying to like figure out what's going on here. And from our own vantage points as the divine, we're all getting to just share with each other. And like Ram Dass says, we're walking each other home through these various perspectives. So I think what surprised me is how, if that's the foundation, then you will be shocked at how free things are, because there is no expectation of perfection that so many, okay. And even to more specifically answer your question, a lot of times pastors, like actually most of the time in general, pastors talk about burnout, and they talk about like feeling this like, oh, it's like so hard because like you're giving so much and you feel so burned out, and like just being a pastor, you're just like, and you're kind of like, you're not really ever able to like be yourself. Like you're always on, and yes, to some degree, when you're a public figure, there is a dynamic that you have to be watchful for, of just like taking care of yourself. But I think that's the thing that surprised me the most is like, genuinely speaking, I'm being genuinely honest, I have not like I just don't feel that like sense of dread and burnout and inauthenticity that so many in this like field talk about. And, you know, I'm not saying it's like because I've figured something out, but I just like, I don't know. I kind of came in feeling like there's got to be another way. Everyone talks so, you know, like kind of negatively about doing this kind of stuff. And I'm like, but isn't the whole thing about the fact that, hey, we're all free. We can all just like trust that love is going to show up for us, right? So it's like this whole message that we're doing is like trust, surrender, letting go of our ideas, letting go of how we think things should be, and realizing that life can actually be so amazing if we get out of our own damn way. And then I was like, hey, what if I actually tried to do that and I was honest about it in real time? Then it's made things actually like shockingly easy. And again, I don't want to pretend like things aren't challenging. I mean, there's like, it's hard. It's still hard structurally, but it's just easier than I thought in certain ways. You know, and here's the thing, like we all want to experience at the end of the day, like whatever your entry point is into spirituality, I believe that more or less we all want to experience a joyful life, a life that is not necessarily easy, because we know that an easy life doesn't necessarily mean a meaningful life, but we want a meaningful life. We want a life that feels like we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And I think it's like, it can be as simple as that. Have to plug. I just got these yesterday. This is my new book.
Yes, dude.
And I just
we gotta do it.
And I just had to get that in there because this book is called Thrival. Certainly will be available by the time this airs on Amazon, and full name is Jake Haber, so you can get it on Kindle and print or whatever. But basically, the idea behind this book is that, like, when I looked at the general theme of what I have been talking about on stage for the last 2.5 years, it's basically like, we want a meaningful life. We want a full life. We don't just want to like survive. We don't just want to make it through. We're here for a short time, and you know, at least as this version of myself, and we want to like do it as well as we possibly can. And I think spirituality is really just the practice of trying to do that well from a variety of angles, you know? And so, so kind of to answer your question, like I've had a tremendous amount of fun just working that out in public and doing it in a context that people are hopefully benefiting from it, being inspired by it. Then I just put as much of that as has unfolded over the last like 2.5 years into this book. So if people are, you know, not a part of the Aldea community, but they want to kind of get a little flavor for the kind of stuff that we talk about and what sort of our journey has been like, you can check that out. But it's full circle because Luke came to Aldea and we talked about his book, Koans of Christ. So it's only fitting that we have that plug right there. So yeah,
absolutely, dude. I wanted to talk to you more about that. I feel like I've been so asking you these questions, and as you talk, I'm like just like I'm in your congregation, dude. I'm just like listening and taking it in, and I'm like I should probably be a little bit more engaged in this conversation. But
we're having a good time.
I've just been listening. I've been listening to the podcast myself as it's being recorded. And I don't necessarily have any too big of a time constraint. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Because if you have a few minutes, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your book. For sure. And also too, like to your point where, and I've been outside of a, you know, like a traditional ministry setting for a long time. And, but I don't have any of necessarily that flowing through my Instagram feed or anything else, but I did notice years ago, and it sounds like it's still that way, that there is this common theme amongst pastors and clergy people of feeling burnt out and fried, and there's been a higher rates of, you know, suicide and things. People that just are really dealing with a lot of stuff as they are navigating like what it means to be a quote public figure or a spiritual leader or anything like that. And you know, my approach has been all of those neurotic impulses that just absolutely kill them. and just go the opposite direction. I have all of that inside of me. I have a Capricorn moon for my astrology friends. So my inside world is quite rigid and annoying AF. However, it's been these points of like just going the opposite direction and doing that. And I think a lot of pastors and clergy people feel that burnout because, like you said, they are on. But on in a way that is not just from like a social perspective, but they're on in a way that has to preserve this story that they continuously are preaching that has to do quite literally with conversions. And to put that into what has swept the church world of like business speak, like sales has overtaken Christianity. How many conversions are you get? Even in business, you call them conversions. Like, what is the metrics? And so many pastors preach from the stage how important it is to be converting people that it doesn't become about being an embodied being that is living in tune with the infinite. It becomes about you being, and I love the language of being like a vessel for God, or an instrument or a tool for divinity. That's great language, but on the negative side of that, you become, your only purpose here is to win souls for heaven and snatch them from the hands of the devil. And you become like consumed by if your metrics are showing that you're actually doing that. And I think a lot of pastors, if they're honest, they just are regurgitating these things, but they don't actually believe them themselves any longer. And there's like this tension that's happening. And what I appreciate, again, just about like where we're at, is like this willingness to be like, I don't have to keep propping this up anymore. And they continuously are propping this thing up, and they wonder why there's no support system under that propping up. And it's like, well, because everything's disintegrated underneath of it. And it's, there's not much there. And so I feel like there's an opportunity in this age, in this era, for people who are spiritual leaders or pastors or whatever, to just let all of that go. Like, and I love that you mentioned that a surprising thing has been like, you dropped into people that were much older than you. It's like, they're going to smell the bullshit a mile away if I come in as the guru. Yeah. They're going to be like, why did we hire this guy? And in their view, this kid. Yeah, you know?
For sure.
And like, you like were kind of just like dropped into this place where you're like, yeah, you're going to have to cut the shit right from the get-go. Because, you know, nobody's going to believe that you're some high spiritual authority, you know? And I've had to really, you know, I consistently tell people, like, I'm not the Pope. You know what I mean? I'm not, you know, I'm just like doing the best I can with what I have. I've learned some things along the way, and I feel like God has given me a particular responsibility of stewardship in this space. But like, yeah, I feel like a lot of pastors, dude, like, could really reclaim their own spiritual health by just getting off of this idea that they need to be something and prop up this like big sales pitch thing that they got going on. You know what I mean?
And I think,
do you feel that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's true of the world of ministry, but I think it's true everywhere, and especially with social media, it's gotten worse because we just look around and we see, you know, people who are doing it better than us, right? We get stuck in comparison, and I think for me, it's like I've learned to even just accept who I am and who I'm not, you know, like I don't, like, I wish that I could say that on top of this other stuff I'm doing, that also, like, I have a great social media page, and I'm like, I'm like terrible. Like, I just have, like, it's not felt authentic right now in this season for me personally to be putting like energy into social media, and yet I look at people who are doing it really well, like you, and I'm like, oh man, like I should. You get caught up in the should, but then you just have these moments where you go, like I'm just doing me, and I'm okay with just being me. I think the Christian like industrial complex has, you know, a lot in common with just the general world, which is like more, better, bigger. And to kind of what you were saying, if you genuinely believe that you're snatching souls out of hell, then I understand having a mindset where you're like, yeah, then we got to just maximize and 10x everything. Because yeah, like
Right.
if that's what is motivating you, then yeah, like you better do everything you can. But if the core of what you're talking about is actually more about accepting yourself and getting to know yourself and finding a spirituality that is deeply internal and grounded from within, then I think your life can also start to reflect more of that level of acceptance and just being, you know, comfortable with where you are and enjoying like, hey, this is my part of the journey. I think for me, like sometimes I'll remember, oh, like I'm not trying to convert anyone of anything. I'm not even necessarily trying to get people to come to our community. Like if people show up and it's not for them and they leave, like I don't care. I don't take it personally. Like, you know,
Yeah.
So coming from a world where it's like, yeah, there's a big metric to how successful you are, how many hands were raised of people that, you know, supposedly were dedicating their life to this path. But for me now, like realizing that there isn't any, you know, like there's nothing I'm trying to accomplish other than just being honest and trusting the flow of like what's this. The community is like, it's not something that I'm making happen. It's this thing that's happening, right? It's like, it's an event. And I get to be a part of it and I get to protect it and steward it and kind of guide it a bit, but it's an event and it's something that involved. I don't mean like it's an event, like it's a thing that happens at a certain time. I mean like it's a phenomenon. It's a thing happening in the universe. There are people and there is an energy and these people come together and this entity, it becomes more than just the sum of its parts. So it's like all these people come and we have this communal like vision and goal, and it just is this thing, that this beautiful happening, like a firework display. And I just, you know, I don't feel like responsible for every last bit of its success or failure, you know? Like, I mean, one of the earliest, you know, ministry tips that I was ever given, like in my, you know, just starting out in all this was, if you take credit for all of your successes, you're going to take credit for all of your failures. And, you know, ironically, it's stayed true for me. And as a Virgo moon, like I'm a very much a perfectionist of like, oh, it wasn't exactly how it's supposed to be. But I'm just realizing like it's this community and the work I'm doing. It doesn't live and die on me. It's not successful because I did something right. And that thing that, oh, I thought I failed. It wasn't because I did something wrong. It's just, this is just what's happening and I can just let go and accept it. And so, you know, maybe there is going to be someone who watches this who is a pastor on their treadmill, or maybe you're just, you know, you're at like another job and you feel like you're on that treadmill. I've got to like prop this thing up. I've got to keep it going. But I think if you just ask yourself, like, really why, like what is this thing I'm propping up? Is it worth my own well-being? And am I actually practicing what I'm preaching? So if I were to like be obsessive over like, you know, accomplishing a certain thing with Aldea or with my career, I actually wouldn't even be practicing the very thing I get on stage and talking about, which is like, let go. It's all temporary. It's like we are part of something much greater. And this idea of control that we have over our lives is kind of an illusion. So like, let's let go. And you'll find that in the letting go, it's all taken care of and it's actually all going to be much better than you could have planned. So that's my message. So I better actually learn to live it, which, dude, to be honest, yes. It's harder. And I want to say that just to say it's much harder lived. I can sit here and be like, oh, I'm trying to, you know, it's hard. It's a daily process. So I'm not pretending that I've got it all figured out for sure.
Yeah, dude, effortless action, man. Wu Wei is it's conceptually easy. In practice, it's so hard.
For sure.
You know, and I'm the same way with that, you know. I do think that it relieves a lot of tension whenever you feel like you're at least seeking to be rested into the groove of your natural expression. Because then like it's so much more in tune just with your natural rhythm and flow that you don't have to be anything else. And I think for those that do come from a Christian background or continue to be interested in this, it's like it is, whenever I talk about the self, I'm talking about Christ in you, being in tune with that is more true than the flesh or the ego or any of these other things. And I just think it's like a prop up of that ego that's keeping people stuck in suffering. I mean, this is fundamental Four Noble Truths of Buddha, that, we find in different language, but in our own tradition. So maybe for a few, can you just talk about how this, because it sounds like this is like intersecting with your book and how you're writing this, at least by the name of the title, Thrival. I mean, Thrival, whenever I hear that word, did you come up with that word, by the way? Is that a?
I thought I did. I mean, like, I didn't hear it anywhere else, but people have used it before. So I realized, like, oh, there's other stuff out there under that name too. But I didn't. I thought I came up with it. I mean, I figured, like, it's 2025, so I mean, I figured, like, I was never the first person to utter that word, but yeah.
Dude, I think it's great, and I think that's. Because whenever I hear that word, I think, yeah, like that's whenever I am in tune with the deep, true, natural, authentic self, which is Christ in me, which is then a hope of glory in me. Like it manifests itself externally as a thriving situation. And now, to your point earlier, you're like, not everything is like always sorted out and figured out. I think externally, to me, the duality of life is externally things will always be there will be some sense of like disconnection somewhere. There's always still another quote problem to fix or whatever. External, the material world will always be fractured in some way. That's just how this world operates.
Yeah.
But the kingdom within, this inner world, this wholeness that's found within, then it gives me the ability to operate through all the fragmentation to bring and tie it together in some way that does make connections where there is separations. And to me, that is thriving, because thriving, we think of, especially, the stereotypical Western way of like, you got a ton of money and a nice house and fun toys and whatever. But like, thriving's that inner sense of wholeness expressing itself even in life's brokenness. That's at least my sort of take on it. But you connected this to like a series you were doing, right? That you just felt a lot of like, I don't know, spiritual juice on or something. And what was the invitation to be like, yeah, this is something I should give my energy and heart to?
So around this time last year, I did a series called Thrival, and the idea was, like you're saying, like, yeah, we survive, and yet what does it mean to actually like live to the fullest that we are able to experience, or at least in pursuit of that, while still living in a very complicated and, in a human life, which is just messy, right? And so it's like we want to just like live as full as we can. And so this series was an opportunity for me to just kind of start throwing some things at the wall of like, hey, here are just some different ways of thinking about things. Let's start from the understanding that, like, if any of your listeners are familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy, which basically says that like we have this hierarchy of needs where like as our needs are met physically, our survival needs, which generally, I'm sure everyone listening hopefully has like all your survival needs. You're not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, I'm guessing, and you have, clothing, food, shelter, etc. As your needs are met, they get more existential. So they start getting into belonging and creativity and like understanding your place in the universe. So essentially, to move from surviving into thriving, we need to start thinking about like, more of our psychological and our spiritual needs. So the series was an opportunity to just kind of start talking about these different like tools that you would add to your, we we probably are all familiar with like a survival kit. I don't know that I think I had one when I was younger, and I just remember there being like food in there that was supposed to last a nuclear apocalypse. So I don't know what that food would have tasted like. I never tried it. I was very curious. Like, it looked horrible, but I was like, what does this taste like? So we know this idea of a survival kit. What would a thrival kit have in it, though? Like what kind of tools would you bring? It's going to be different for everyone. But I began to throw things out there and just see like, hey, what sticks? What if it resonates for you, run with it. If not, don't put it in your own personal kit. That's fine. And this series ended up being like 10 weeks, which is kind of funny because I rarely do a series more than like 4 or 5 weeks, and so because there was just so much to talk about, and and I was talking about community, and like community is a part of thriving, and how we like perceive reality and our understanding of different things, right? And so then when I was looking to put this book together, which is essentially taking kind of this longer journey that we've been on as a community and the things that I've been processing and teaching on for like 2.5 years, I realized that pretty much everything kind of fit into this idea of a thrival kit, because at the end of the day, I've been getting on stage and going, hey, here's another perspective. Here's another angle. Here's another different way of approaching things. Here's a different way of understanding this word or that concept. Maybe this will be helpful to you, right? And so I realized everything I've been doing has been about helping, just throwing things out there that people might want to add to their thrival kit. And so every chapter is more or less like a message, or some chapters are more like series, and it's just vastly different angles. I mean, some of it's more personal, like, there's this one section where I talk about doing internal family systems therapy, which is like a form of therapy where you start to like examine different parts of yourselves and recognize that there are different, like, even as one being, we're showing up with all these different psychological parts. So I mean, like, there was a whole message I did where I was just like, hey, tried this. This is interesting. This seems to resonate in certain ways. What do you think? Then there's other message or other chapters that are more like, oh, like, here's just a concept that we've had for so long. Maybe we're willing to rethink it, or, hey, maybe rethinking God in these certain ways might help us thrive more, or maybe rethinking, religion in these certain ways, or reinterpreting what that word even means might help us thrive more. So it's basically what happens when you start to build a community and you build sort of a, like, your gatherings are built around just this idea of, hey, we want to be the best we can to each other. We want to be kind. We want to be more loving. We want to open up. We want to learn to let go. We want to be more free. And if you just open that up, a certain sort of dialogue starts forming. And that basically formed the basis of the book.
Dude, I love that. I think I'm really excited to get a copy.
Cool.
And check it out. When does it come out?
It comes out on the April 18th, which is the Friday, Good Friday. But I'm sure at this point that will have passed, so your readers will be able to, or listeners will be able to become readers. And you can find it. So it felt like it was kind of, I don't know, felt like some kind of, fun. I just thought it'd be funny to release it on, or interesting to release it on Good Friday and, around Easter, because, I think for me, and even with this year, so much comes back to the life, death, and resurrection cycle that we see in Easter. And so when I think about thriving, so a big theme in this book is you're gonna face difficult shit, and you're gonna, like, life's gonna, like, totally knock you, like, all around, and things are gonna happen that are gonna, like, totally shake you and are gonna feel like, the end of your faith, or it's gonna feel like the end of the world. But actually, those things are generally gateways into more truth, more honesty, fuller life, right? The butterfly or the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, dies, and then becomes the butterfly, becomes more than it was. And this is what we see in the Easter story, life, death, resurrection. It's present in nature. It's present everywhere. And so in this book, it shows up a lot because it's like, thrival doesn't happen in spite of the difficulty. It's not like here's a tool guide on how to avoid every hard thing in your life. It's like, no, here's some perspectives on how to embrace the difficulty like Jesus did, right? He said yes to all of it, the pain, the suffering. How do we embrace the difficulty and challenge and understand it anew as actually the very thing that's leading us towards rebirth and renewal and a deeper, more fuller experience of life.
Dude, I love it. I'm ready to get my copy.
Cool, man.
You sold me.
Well, I have your book in my shelf, so we're like book buddies or something,
I know, man. I know. I love that. And it's so great because, like, I don't know if you used Amazon to publish the book, but it's great in this day and age that everybody, even this podcast, right? Stuff can get to people really fast, and fresh ideas and fresh encouragement, from different perspectives can get to people really quickly. And I'm just like grateful that you took the time to compile that together and to get it to people, because it's really important stuff. And I believe that there was, to get a little woo on folks as we close here, like as I've been reflecting, I think there really was some sort of energy split in 2020. I do think in 5 years later now, we're kind of feeling the emergence of that. And a lot of times whenever something happens, we don't know it right away. I mean, in some ways we did with COVID, but there's these different paths that you see people going on at this point. And I feel like things like resources are able to encourage people in this sort of fork in the road that's happening in culture and society right now. And fear can make people really retreat and revert back to the old system. But you know what? That old system, it's the Titanic going down, and books, resources, podcasts become life rafts whenever, the mothership has gone down and to get us to where we're going next. And I feel like, this book and just what you're doing with Aldea is an opportunity for people to venture into new waters, new territory. And I just appreciate your being true to that prompting to create that. So
thanks,
I
man.
appreciate you coming and sharing with our community, dude. I wanted your voice to be
thanks, man.
in some way in this space. So I'm grateful for this podcast.
Yeah, thank you. You're doing the same thing. And I think you're talking about, this major shift that's happening, and how do we just stay grounded, stay afloat during all of it? Because it's there's a lot of big energy going on. And I think the work you're doing, and even just, helping people, using this podcast as a way to remind people that community is really just a powerful and safe source to find that grounding, find that connection. We're not going to be able to do it alone. COVID showed us many things, but it showed us how much we desire being with each other and connecting.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're doing, all the same, it's so important. And I hope that, people who are listening just remember, when you're just confused about what's going on out there in the world, in the bigger picture, lean on the people and the gatherings and the community that you have right in front of you. That's going to get you through, right? Not getting all the right ideas about what's going on out there, but the real experiences that are awaiting you, right? So, dive in.
Yep. Yeah, man. Well, why don't you come over to Carlsbad and bring some books, and we'll do a live thing.
Not far. Don't tempt me. We are not that far. The Tucson to San Diego pipeline is pretty strong. So easy.
Yeah, man.
Anytime. Yeah.
Well, that's why I came to Tucson. I'm like, in person is where it's at. So, I mean, this has been great, but there's nothing like being together.
For sure.
If you want to cruise over, man,
I love that.
Invitation is always there.
As long as we can go to the beach, that'd be fun.
Dude, you can almost see the water from where we meet.
Okay.
I mean, we're right here in Carlsbad Village, man. So
we'll do your gathering, and then I'll just immediately run into the water. I'll just it's
You can do it,
Okay,
man.
cool.
We're right here. We're maybe a half mile from the beach.
I can run that. Yeah.
And it's getting hot. It's
Yeah.
getting hot in Tucson, so it's time to come over.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. That's a whole other, there's surviving the heat, man. It's hard. Thrival's even harder when it's 108. So, but we figured it out.
Dang, dude. Well, all of your information will be in the notes below, and friends that have closed this out with us, thank you for being here till the end, and pick up a copy of Jake's book, Thrival, and see you on another episode. And thank you for joining me for an hour and a half,
So
dude.
much fun. It was an absolute blast. Felt like 15 minutes because of how much fun I was having, so thank you.
Love it, dude.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Cool.